3 years alone in this fallen city, scavenging tech and talking to a sandwich called Gerald. Then the containment pod opened, and she asked me about time in a voice that shattered reality. No one remembered her existence. No one except me. Why did I refuse the memory wipe protocol when everyone else forgot? What made her so special that even the universe conspired to erase her, but couldn't erase me? Kai's mornings began the same way for 3 years. Not with a checklist of what needed to be salvaged, but with a silent listen to the city's hum. His routine wasn't about survival. It was a kind of conversation. He moved, and the city answered. Transit tubes would glow a fraction brighter as he neared them, their internal lights shifting from a dim amber to a soft blue-white. Fungal growths clinging to the walls pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light that seemed to track his progress down empty corridors. It wasn't his imagination. His salvaged scanner, a jury-rigged mess of wires and cracked screens, confirmed it. The device didn't just pick up energy signatures. It chattered, a constant stream of low-frequency data his conscious mind couldn't parse, but something deeper recognized. The bioluminescent flora wasn't just decoration. It was a guide. Clusters of the soft glowing fungi grew thicker along certain hallways, their light patterns shifting subtly when he approached a branching path. It remembered a route, a pattern his own mind had lost. This wasn't loneliness. Loneliness is an empty feeling. This was a programmed isolation, a specific path laid out for him by a technology that knew its user. His one-sided chats with Gerald, the slightly stale protein sandwich he carried everywhere, were just noise. A conscious mind throwing up distractions, trying to rationalize the irrational pull it was constantly fighting. Every spike on his scanner's readout, every new corridor the lights illuminated was another breadcrumb, a piece of a trail he was built to follow. His 3-year wandering through the derelict sectors wasn't driven by curiosity or a scavenger's greed. It was an unconscious drift. A slow, inevitable migration pulled along a current he couldn't see, coded into the very environment around him. The metal underfoot, the air in the vents, the light in the walls, all of it was part of a system that recognized him as a priority user. He wasn't exploring. He was being led. His descent into the lower research sectors felt less like a choice and more like a body of water finding its level. The resistance was gone. Doors irised open before he reached them. Lights flared to life ahead of him and died behind him, sealing off any other path. The scanner's chatter became a constant, urgent whine. He was heading home. He just didn't know it yet. The city remembered its purpose, even if he had forgotten his. Every step was a confirmation, a system check for the returning primary user, completing a circuit that had been left open for far too long. The city didn't just lie dormant. It breathed. A low, almost subsonic hum vibrated through the deck plates wherever Kai walked, the kind of sound you felt in your teeth before you heard it. This wasn't a ruin. It was a participant. Its mood-responsive architecture, a pre-fall luxury, still functioned on a trickle of emergency power. He'd round a corner to find the lights in the next corridor already flaring to life, illuminating his intended path. A heavy security door would iris open without a single spoken command or scan. The systems recognized him, not just as a human, as a priority user. None of this was in any Terran manual or scavenger's guide. This was alien tech, a feature of the integration project, a side effect of the bond they'd tried to forge. The soft pulsing flora wasn't some random mutation. It was bioengineered, a stellari interface made flesh and chlorophyll, woven into the city's infrastructure like a nervous system. These growths clung to transit tubes and dead consoles for a reason. They were feeding, drawn to the faint residual energy still bleeding from a single shielded containment pod, deep in the research district. They acted like a neural network, a distributed consciousness spread across the entire sector, silently waiting for its central node to come back online. Kai's salvage scanner was the only thing that could translate. It didn't just detect energy, it interpreted intent. The constant stream of data on its cracked screen was the city's crude, persistent attempt to communicate. A greeting, a confirmation, a repeated system check pinging the returning primary user over and over. The flora's rhythmic pulse wasn't random. It was a response. When he hesitated at an intersection, the glow from one branching tunnel would intensify, a subtle nudge in the right direction. It remembered the protocol, It was running the program even if its user had forgotten the steps. This sentient behavior was the proof. The city itself was a living monument to the forgotten experiment. The integration protocol hadn't failed completely. It had gone dormant. Partially successful and still shockingly active, it had turned the entire urban structure into a receiver, tuned to one specific frequency. His frequency. The air in the lower levels grew thicker, charged with an energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The hum wasn't just in the deck plates anymore. It was in the air itself. The walls seemed to lean in. The scanner's whine climbed to a pitch that was almost painful, its needle pinned in the red. He wasn't being guided toward a location anymore. He was being pulled toward a source. The city was escorting him home, its systems buzzing with a long-awaited recognition. It had been waiting for this, for him. Everything he'd seen for 3 years, the lights, the hum, the pulsing growths. It was all part of the same silent fanfare, celebrating a return it never thought would happen. The experiment was still running, and he was walking right into its heart. The trail ended at a sealed bulkhead door frosted over with a substance that wasn't ice. The research district lay beyond, a tomb to a forgotten ambition. Kai's breath hitched. The air here felt thick, heavy to move through. It tasted metallic on his tongue, like biting down on an old battery. His scanner, which had been a steady companion of chirps and whines, lost its mind. The needle on the main display slammed against the pin, trembling. The screen flickered through a chaotic cascade of readings, energy signatures spiking in every direction like a panicked heartbeat. The door finally groaned open, revealing a corridor transformed. Everything was encased. Consoles, chairs, scattered tools, all buried under a glassy crystalline formation that pulsed with a faint internal light. He stepped inside. The crystals crunched under his boots, not like breaking glass, but with a strange resonant snap that vibrated up through his bones. They weren't ice or some mineral deposit. They were a physical symptom, a byproduct of temporal distortion. The very fabric of space-time had been stressed here, and this was the scar tissue it left behind. Wading through the jagged forest of them was like moving through the solidified memory of the facility's final, catastrophic moment. His salvaged scanner was the only piece of tech that could even begin to parse the chaos. While any standard issue device would have fried its circuits immediately, his cobbled-together machine held. It shared a twisted design lineage with the source of all this energy. It spoke the same broken language. It filtered the screaming data into something he could almost understand. A low, persistent hum that seemed to resonate inside his skull. His boot knocked against something small and solid buried in the crystalline growth near a half-fused console. He knelt, prying it loose. A capsule-sized memory drive. Its casing was partially degraded, the contacts corroded. He wiped away the grime. This was physical evidence. A piece of hardware from a project that wasn't supposed to exist. He didn't have the gear to read it here, but its mere presence was a validation. It contained a fragment of a life. A moment in time he couldn't grasp but felt in his gut. "Looks like someone had a busy day, Gerald," he muttered, his voice sounding small and hollow in the cavernous, crystalline space. The joke was a reflex, the only way to give voice to the overwhelming sense of familiarity and dread tightening in his chest. This place knew him. It remembered him. Every step deeper into the lab complex amplified the feeling. The hum of the reactive architecture wasn't a background noise anymore. It was a rising crescendo of recognition, a building wave of energy that pulled him forward. The light from the walls and the crystals intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for him. The city wasn't just escorting him anymore. It was presenting him to the heart of the anomaly. He was getting close. The proof was no longer just a feeling. It was in his hand, cold and real. The pod sat at the chamber's heart, its surface a seamless curve of alloy untouched by the crystalline decay that gripped everything else. It wasn't a coffin. Its status panel glowed with a steady soft light, the systems inside humming with a quiet vitality that defied the dead consoles surrounding it. It was waiting. Then it happened. The containment field didn't just shut off. It dissolved. It unspooled from the top down like a knot coming undone, each thread of energy breaking apart into a million shimmering particles of light. They didn't fade. They hung there, a swirling cloud of luminescent dust caught in the still air. Then the cloud contracted, pulling itself inward, the particles coalescing, shaping a form from the chaos. Her skin wasn't pale like a human's. It was like watching light reflect off a still pool at dawn, a surface that seemed to absorb the ambient glow of the crystals in the chamber and reinterpret it, giving it back softer, stranger. Her hair fell in waves that looked less like strands and more like solidified twilight. Elongated ears tapered to fine points, and her eyes, they were the center of it. They held a multifocal radiance, pupils like fractured obsidian set in a sea of shifting liquid silver. She was utterly, profoundly alien, and her first word was a human word, whispered in a voice that seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made the air shiver. Time? The single syllable hung between them, an impossible question mark. It wasn't just a query about duration. The way she shaped the word fractured its meaning. It asked about chronology. It asked about opportunity lost. It asked what moment this even was. This was the moment every scavenger myth promised, finding the goddess in the machine. But she wasn't a reward. She stood there, unsteady on her feet, one hand braced against the cool lip of the pod, her strange eyes scanning the ruined chamber with a look of deep, profound disorientation. She was an equal, a partner cast adrift, seeking the same anchor he was. Her emergence wasn't his discovery. It was her planned awakening. His presence in the chamber, his specific neural signature, was the key that finally turned in the lock. He was the final piece of the puzzle arriving on schedule, even if his own schedule was 3 years off. The system had waited for the right user, and now it had him. The awe of the moment stretched, thick and silent. Then she swayed, her grip on the pod tightening. Kai took an involuntary step forward, his scavenger instincts overriding the wonder. Whoa, easy there. Her luminous eyes focused on him, the disorientation sharpening into a razor-edge assessment. The shift was immediate, jarring, and it grounded everything. It prevented the moment from floating away into pure mysticism. This was real. She was real, confused, and standing in a defunct lab. 3 years, he said, answering the question she had asked and the dozen she hadn't. Roughly. She absorbed that. The silver in her eyes seemed to swirl faster. Her response wasn't awe or gratitude. It was a dry, pointed observation, a test masked as a quip. You're human. How are you here? It was the most important question in the universe, and it was his turn to answer. The mystery was no longer what was in the pod. It was what happened to time, and why their meeting was the key to putting it back together. His confirmation of the time gap landed like a physical blow. 3 years for him, decades for everything else. The weight of it should have broken her. Her entire world, her colleagues, the project itself gone. Wiped away by time while she slept. Her luminous eyes didn't widen in shock. They narrowed. The disorientation burned away, replaced by a sharp analytical focus. Instead of despair, her response was a wry, pointed observation. You're human.
How are you here?
It was a defense mechanism, a way to deflect the enormity of her own loss by turning the scrutiny outward. But it was also a test, a probe. She was assessing his knowledge, his state of mind, his very nature. Was he a random interloper? A new guard? Or something else entirely? Her question was a diagnostic tool, and she watched his reaction like a technician reading a screen. His answer was a deflection of its own. They tried to evacuate everyone. I ignored the memos. A half-truth wrapped in a joke. It hid the deeper, uglier reality he didn't yet understand. The memory wipes, the protocols, the chair thrown in the medical bay. He gave her the easy version, the lone scavenger who stayed behind out of stubbornness. It was simpler, safer. Their back and forth became a rapid-fire exchange of information disguised as humor, a way to establish a fragile trust without the raw vulnerability that Zhenxiang would demand. It was a dance. Each quip, each dry observation, was a step closer, a way to measure the other's footing on this new, unstable ground. This banter laid the foundation. It was how two traumatized beings, one from a forgotten past and one from a lonely present, found common ground in the sheer absurdity of their situation. A Stellari scientist and a human scavenger, standing in a ruined lab discussing a multi-decade time skip with the casual tone of people complaining about the rain. It revealed her intelligence, her adaptability, the quick, sharp mind that could process catastrophic personal loss and immediately pivot to pragmatic assessment. It also revealed her immediate instinctual recognition that he was not just some random guy with a scanner. A random guy wouldn't be here. A random guy wouldn't have the access codes buried in his neural pathways that made the city itself hum in recognition. The humor didn't erase the loneliness. It transformed it. It took Kai's 3-year burden of solitary weirdness and made it a shared bizarre experience. His talks with Gerald were no longer the sad ramblings of a broken mind. They were a practice run for talking to someone who actually talked back with the same dry, bruised wit. Their first real conversation, filled with comical and testing banter, quickly anchored the larger, unspoken truth. This wasn't a chance encounter. A radical project had left its permanent, invisible mark on both of them, and their meeting was the circuit finally closing. The project's legacy wasn't just the pod or the ruined lab. It was the ease of their connection, the unspoken understanding that flickered behind the jokes. They were partners in this long before they knew what this was. The banter was just the language their partnership had chosen to speak first. It was the handshake before the mission briefing, the shared glance before the fight. It was how they acknowledged, without ever saying it, that they were in this together. She told him the story piece by piece, her voice steady but her eyes tracing the crystalline patterns on the floor as if reading the history etched there. The integration project's stated goal sounded like something from a Senate appropriations hearing. Noble, inspiring, a complete lie. The official promise was the next step in interspecies cooperation. A bridge to connect two civilizations at the most fundamental level possible, consciousness itself. The unofficial caveat, the part that didn't make the glossy brochures, was that the practical applications were slightly more complicated than the brochure suggested. They always are. This wasn't a lab experiment with test subjects. Athelia was a willing participant, a lead scientist in her own right, a living embodiment of what the pure science could achieve. The aim was to allow Stellari and humans to share knowledge, memory, and experience directly, not through language or data streams, but through a synchronized neural link. It was supposed to be a revolution in understanding, a way to truly know another species, to feel what they felt, to see the universe through their eyes. The potential for scientific advancement was staggering. The potential for cultural exchange was something poets would have written about. The project was a beautiful, fragile thing. And like all beautiful, fragile things, it attracted the wrong kind of attention. The corruption didn't happen overnight. It was slow, insidious. Politicians and military strategists from both sides got involved. They didn't see a bridge. They saw a potential weapon. The funding priorities shifted. The pure research was sidelined, its budget quietly reallocated to a new line item: weapons applications. The project became a liability overnight. The bridge they were building to foster unity was being retrofitted into a bomb, a tool for espionage, for psychological warfare, for the ultimate invasion of the mind. The ethical spine of the whole narrative is this betrayal, the cold, calculated perversion of curiosity and cooperation by fear and greed. The scientists, the real ones like Athelia and Dr. Yumoto, were pushed to the margins. Their work was stolen, their data repurposed for agendas they never agreed to. The project's immense potential wasn't lost to some accident or scientific hubris. It was stolen, deliberately weaponized. Its original noble purpose was systematically erased, scrubbed from the records along with the identities of its participants. They weren't just shutting down a failed experiment. They were burying an inconvenient truth. The true legacy of the integration project isn't the ruined lab or the temporal distortions. It's a warning. A stark lesson in what happens when pure scientific curiosity collides head-on with geopolitical machinations. The science itself becomes the casualty. The pursuit of knowledge is sacrificed on the altar of power. The dream of a shared future was dismantled and its parts were sold for scrap to the highest military bidder. It wasn't a failure of science. It was a failure of ethics, a failure of nerve. They had the next step in evolution right there in their hands, and they chose to turn it into a knife. A chunk of memory, fragmented and raw, surfaced from the corrupted drive. An access log, a personnel file, a list of primary neural signatures cleared for deep bond protocols. The picture it painted wasn't of a scavenger. It was of a pioneer. Kai stared at the flickering data on the cracked screen, the words refusing to align with the man he'd been for 3 years. The silence in the chamber grew heavy. Then he broke it, the disclosure coming out coated in a layer of dry humor that did nothing to hide the dread underneath. Turns out I was the primary test subject for permanent integration protocols. That single line, delivered like a bad punchline, underscored the project's sheer audacity. They weren't playing with temporary neural links or short-term data transfers. They were architects. They were building a permanent bridge between two species, trying to forge a connection that would last a lifetime. A synchronization of consciousness so complete it would blur the line where one mind ended and another began. The ambition was staggering. He and Dr. Yumoto weren't just colleagues swapping data in a lab. They were revolutionaries, partners in a quiet, radical attempt to rewrite the rules of interaction between their peoples. He hadn't just volunteered for a few harmless scans. He was the ideal candidate. His neural plasticity was off the charts, his psychological profile showing an unwavering, almost stubborn belief in the project's core goal. He wasn't a subject. He was a true believer, the human key to a locked door. Athelia watched him process this, her luminous eyes holding a quiet, painful understanding. Her confirmation was soft, but it landed with the force of a hull breach. "You were my assigned integration partner." It was the final piece, the click of a lock sliding home. Their connection wasn't chance. It wasn't fate. It was by design, a partnership assigned and forged in the heart of the most advanced lab either species had ever built. This intimate history explained everything. The telepathic pull he'd felt for years, a constant nagging sensation he'd dismissed as solitude, the profound familiarity that had washed over him the second her pod opened, a recognition that went deeper than memory, the way the city itself responded to him, its systems humming to life at his approach. He wasn't an intruder being tolerated. He was part of the system, a primary user returning to his station. His 3-year wandering through the abandoned sectors wasn't a survival story. It was a subconscious pilgrimage, a journey back to his assigned post, guided by a neural imprint he couldn't consciously remember, pulled by the bond that had never fully broken. He was coming back to his partner. In a single moment, Kai's entire identity transformed. He was no longer a lone survivor picking through the bones of a dead city. He was the linchpin of a failed revolution, the sole keeper of a bridge that was supposed to change everything. His refusal to submit to the memory wipe, the act he'd framed as simple stubbornness, was now revealed for what it truly was. It was an act of defiance, a refusal to let them erase the future he had helped build. He had protected the memory of the project, and the memory of her not by chance, but because a part of him, the part they had tried to build a bridge with, knew exactly what it was doing. He had been fighting for her long before he knew her name. The backup consciousness, a flickering hologram labeled Miranda, laid out the evacuation's dirty secret not with an apology, but with a flat, administrative tone. Memory adjustment protocol. Standard issue for all personnel leaving the sector. A neat, clean solution. A way to unknow the Stellari risk, to surgically remove specific memories of the project and its participants from public knowledge. A complete erasure dressed up as a medical procedure. Kai didn't just refuse. He refused rather dramatically. The security footage from the medical bay told the story. 2 orderlies, a neural scanner humming on a tray, him backing away from it, his expression not of fear but of cold building rage, and then the chair, a heavy reinforced medbay chair. He didn't swing it. He picked it up and threw it. The image was stark, almost comical in its violence. It smashed into the scanner, sending medical tools clattering across the floor. This wasn't a quiet protest. It was a riot, a single violent, desperate act to protect the truth, to protect her memory from being wiped clean. His refusal was so absolute, so physically ingrained, that it became part of his neural profile, a core part of his identity that the memory-scrubbing algorithm couldn't parse or remove. It was a glitch in their system, an error of pure human will. That one moment of defiant violence is the only reason he remembers anything. It's the sole reason the universe's coordinated attempt to erase her failed. The chair wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol, a statement, a refusal to let his history, his partnership, his very self be rewritten by a committee. His famous stubbornness, the personality quirk that made him a nightmare for administrators and a legend among scavengers, was revealed as the critical factor that saved the entire experiment from total oblivion. It wasn't a flaw. It was the most important tool he had. He anchored the truth through sheer force of personality when technology and authority tried to drown it. That one act in the medical bay, captured in grainy security footage, was the pivotal event. The linchpin. It allowed a stolen future to survive, buried but intact, in one single mind. It made him the sole keeper of a secret that was supposed to be impossible to keep. He carried the entire weight of the project's true purpose, its real potential, for 3 years without knowing it. The memory wipe didn't fail because of a technical error. It failed because it encountered a will that was harder than any code. It ran into a man who would rather throw a chair at a 1,000,000 credit machine than let them take one single, vital memory from him. He protected her long before he knew her name, defending a ghost with the only weapon he had left, a refusal to forget. Official logs showed the rescue attempts, one after another. Each team launched, each securing the same grid coordinates. Each team made it all the way to the containment chamber. They stood right where Kai was standing now, and every single time, the report filed afterward listed the same outcome: critical memory failure. This wasn't an accident. It was a feature. A deliberate, chilling application of the weaponized consciousness tech. The chamber itself was booby-trapped, not with explosives or lasers, but with a neural command, a silent, insidious trigger woven into the very energy field surrounding the pod. The rescuers would enter. They would see her. A living, breathing Stellari woman held in perfect stasis, and in that instant of recognition the weapon fired. Not a bullet. A command. It scrubbed the encounter from their short-term memory, a targeted surgical strike against their recall. The neural pathway that held the image of her, the reason for being there, was simply erased. They forgot what they saw. They forgot why it mattered. They would turn around, walk out, file their mission reports with clean consciences and blank spots where the truth should be. Mission concluded. No subject found. A waste of time and resources. They would return to their ships and their lives completely unaware of the woman they had left behind in the dark. They became unwilling accomplices in her imprisonment. This cycle of failure created a perfect prison. More effective than any wall or force field. She was physically accessible. Anyone could walk right up to her. But mentally she was a ghost, erased from the perception of anyone who came near. The weapon wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to isolate, to make a person disappear from history itself, to become a story that no one could remember to tell. The memory modification technology was a direct perversion of their own work. They took the tools for connection, for shared understanding, and twisted them into an instrument of absolute loneliness. It turned empathy and duty into the very mechanisms of her erasure. Each rescue team, motivated by the best intentions, became another brick in the wall of her cell. It was a prison built not of steel, but of forgotten memories. A sentence of perpetual obscurity. She wasn't just locked away. She was made into a secret that kept itself. The rescuers weren't failing. They were succeeding perfectly at the mission they didn't know they were on, to confirm that no one was there. To prove that Subject 17 was a phantom, the horrifying effectiveness of this tech is what these failed missions prove. It demonstrates a level of control that is utterly insidious. The ability to not just hide something, but to make the act of finding it impossible to remember. It turns the human mind into its own jailer. The rescuers left each time believing they had completed a thorough search. They had no idea they were the delivery mechanism for her continued sentence. They were the perfect wardens for a prisoner they could never see. After the 7th expedition came back with the same blank report, the official record changed. Subject 17's files got a new classification, not just top secret. A level beyond that. A grade of clearance that meant the information wasn't just restricted, it was considered a contagion, too dangerous to be known. The system itself was instructed to treat her existence as a cognitive hazard. Then came the final sweep. A facility-wide memory adjustment protocol, a targeted neural modification for every single person who had ever been near the project. Not a blanket wipe, a precise surgical strike. It hunted for specific memory engrams related to the Stellari participant and excised them. The official reason, buried in the logs, was standard procedure for classified consciousness research. The real reason was a cover-up, a final mopping-up operation to eliminate any lingering trace of the truth. They weren't just shutting the project down. They were burning the evidence and melting the lock. Athelia processed this, her luminous eyes fixed on the data stream. The pieces locked into place. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the chamber. Someone weaponized your consciousness-sharing techniques to erase you from everyone's memory. The question wasn't what anymore. It was who and why. This wasn't an unfortunate side effect or a project gone horribly wrong. It was a targeted, intentional act of sabotage, a deliberate perversion. The conspirators didn't just want to stop the project. They wanted to bury it so completely that it became unrememberable. They used the project's own most beautiful, ambitious technology, the tool for connection, and turned it into a tool for absolute isolation. This revelation changed everything. It transformed Kai and Athelia from victims into investigators. The personal tragedy of their separation was now a professional mystery. They were no longer just two people trapped in a ruined lab. They were hunting the ghost of their own past. They were chasing the architects of their erasure. The encrypted files they had accessed weren't just the project's blueprints. They were the crime scene. The data held the fingerprints of the saboteurs. The access logs showed who was in the system during the final hours, rewriting the protocols. The budget reallocations pointed to which departments suddenly got a massive, unexplained funding boost. The security clearances revealed who had the authority to classify something beyond top secret. This was a formal data recovery operation now. A meticulous process of following the digital paper trail left by the people who had corrupted their science for power. They were piecing together a conspiracy, one fragmented data packet at a time. Each new file was another clue, a name, a timestamp, a transferred command. The mystery expanded from a single locked room to an entire shadowy network of individuals who saw a bridge and decided to build a wall instead. They were hunting the people who looked at the future and chose to weaponize it. The terminal sat between them, its screen a solid wall of red text and encryption warnings. The last barrier. Athelia studied the alert. Joint encryption, she said, the words a quiet statement of the problem. Kai nodded, his eyes scanning the readout. We'd have to match neural frequencies, synchronize, like tuning two instruments to the same note. He made it sound like a simple calibration. It wasn't. This was the technology that had been weaponized to erase her. Now they had to use it voluntarily. They had to lower every defense and invite it in. This wasn't about a data merge. It wasn't about sharing thoughts or memories. It was about alignment, about two separate consciousnesses finding a shared rhythm, a harmonic resonance that would act as a living key. They had to become a single cryptographic unit. The intimacy of it was absolute. They had to place a trust in each other, and in the process itself that went beyond anything they'd faced in the ruins. Letting their minds intertwine, even for a moment, was an act of immense courage. They knew exactly what this tech could do. It could erase a person from history. It could rewrite a mind. To willingly open themselves to it was to stare into the weapon that had shot them and ask it to perform surgery. There was no protocol for this. No safety net. Just a mutual, silent agreement that the truth was worth the risk. They didn't speak. A look was enough. A shared breath. Then they focused on the terminal. Kai felt it first. A pressure at the edge of his awareness, gentle but insistent. Then a sensation, not of invasion, but of presence. A warmth brushing against his consciousness like starlight flowing through him. It was her mental signature, alien and familiar all at once, meeting his. There was no transfer of language or images. Just a feeling of two separate rhythms slowing, shifting, searching for a common beat. The terminal screen flickered. The solid wall of red warnings dissolved into a cascade of streaming data. It worked. The joint key had turned in the lock. Unlocking the files wasn't like reading. It was an experience. Data didn't scroll across a screen. It unfolded in their linked awareness with a startling, visceral clarity. They didn't learn facts. They felt memories. They caught flashes of intention from long-dead researchers. The thrill of a breakthrough. The cold fear of political oversight. The project's ultimate aim revealed itself not as a paragraph in a report, but as a shared understanding that settled into their bones. It was more audacious than Kai had ever imagined. This wasn't just about sharing knowledge. It was about creating permanent bridges, allowing Stellari and human minds to exist in a symbiotic unity, a complete rewriting of what a species boundary even meant. He saw the research. Both races were approaching evolutionary dead ends. Humans too aggressive and territorial. Stellari becoming too ethereal, losing their grip on physical reality. The integration was meant to be a correction, a way for both species to survive by borrowing what the other lacked. It was a plan for mutual salvation. The experience shifted their bond on a fundamental level. They were no longer just allies thrown together by circumstance. They were partners in the most literal sense. Their minds had touched, had worked in concert to achieve a single goal. They had shared a purpose on a level deeper than language. The process they had feared, the one that had been used to hurt them, had instead given them a glimpse of what it was supposed to be. A tool for connection, a way to build something new together. They had faced the weapon and remembered its original beautiful purpose. The encrypted truth was theirs, and it was bigger than either of them could have guessed. The data didn't just reveal a cover-up. It revealed a ticking clock. Miranda's monitoring systems pulled logs from the weeks after the evacuation. The readings were clear. The incomplete integration between them wasn't a quiet failure. It was a broadcast, a unique pulsing energy signature leaking from their fractured connection like blood from a wound that wouldn't close. It had been transmitting for decades. This energy wasn't passive. It had created a feedback loop, an uncontrolled, unconscious transmission of Stellari interface commands, bleeding out into the local space-time, a signal on a loop, repeating the same broken handshake over and over year after year. This constant broadcast was the real anchor. It's what had tethered Athelia's consciousness to his across the gulf of time, and his to hers. It was the reason their bond survived the systematic erasure when everything else was wiped clean. They had been holding each other in place with a signal neither of them knew they were sending. The energy wasn't just leaking, it was actively working on the universe around it. The logs showed massive shifts in local space-time. The crystallized equipment, the strange energy readings Kai's scanner picked up, the way the city's architecture responded to him. These weren't just weird phenomena. They were the physical symptoms of a metaphysical problem. The feedback loop was bending local physics. Reality was becoming flexible around the source of the distortion. Like a heavy object on a stretched sheet, their connection was warping everything nearby. The arc of their personal story reached a near-apocalyptic pitch. Projections pulled from the data were stark. These distortions were expanding. They would reach a critical mass, a point of no return. After that, the effects wouldn't just be local. They would become permanent and begin to affect interstellar space. Reality alteration on a galactic scale was no longer a theoretical risk. It was a countdown. The laws of physics were breaking down in their vicinity, and the spontaneous merging of consciousness and matter was a real possibility. A universal catastrophe born from a single interrupted connection. Athelia processed the data, her luminous eyes reflecting the scrolling threat assessments. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a collapsing star. We've been anchoring each other across time. The statement was simple, profound. It cemented the terrifying gravity of their situation. Their personal bond, their private story of loss and reunion had cosmic consequences. They weren't just two people in a room. They were the epicenter of a reality quake. Kai stared at the screen, the numbers and graphs mapping out a potential end of everything. He finally acknowledged a responsibility he hadn't accepted before. This wasn't about fixing their past or getting their memories back. This was about stopping a chain reaction they had accidentally started. They had to fix what they began, not for themselves, but for the universe. The personal quest was over. The mission was now salvation on a scale he could barely comprehend. The temporal spatial distortions reframed every single thing. The breadcrumb trail of lights, the humming walls, the pulsing fungi. It was all part of a system screaming in feedback. They had walked into the heart of a disaster they built, and now they had to find a way to unbuild it before the very fabric of space-time came apart at the seams. They didn't come with guns. That was the first surprise. A fleet of ships descended through the crystalline distortion of New Geneva's upper atmosphere, their silhouettes stark against the shimmering sky. Not the blocky warships of a Terran enforcement group. Sleeker vessels, their design a clear blend of Stellari biotechnology and human engineering. They didn't ring the facility with target locks. They deployed a wide, shimmering containment field that settled over the ruined research district like a blanket. The effect was immediate. The local space-time, which had been vibrating with the erratic pulse of their incomplete bond, stabilized. The air stopped tasting like a live wire. The hum in the deck plate smoothed out to a low, manageable thrum. This wasn't an attack. It was an intervention. A communication channel clicked open on a clean, official frequency. The voice that came through was calm, professional. It laid out the situation with a clinical precision that was more unsettling than any threat. They knew about the temporal distortions. They knew about the feedback loop. Their proposal was simple, direct, and terrifying. They offered safe completion protocols, a controlled, assisted process to finalize the interrupted neural integration. The choice they presented was stark. Completing the bond might stabilize the wild energy rippling out from the facility, seal the fracture in reality their broken connection had created, or it might make the distortions exponentially worse. The cascade could accelerate, turning the local reality quake into a full-blown galactic event. This was the fine line they were being asked to walk. The difference between healing the wound and tearing it wide open, between salvation and apocalypse. Miranda's voice cut through the tense silence on their private channel, her tone drier than the dust outside. Reality-bending love stories have become quite fashionable in post-evacuation society. The meta-humor was a pinprick, a tiny, necessary release of pressure that acknowledged the sheer absurdity of their position. It grounded them. They weren't just lab subjects in a cosmic accident. They were participants in a narrative so bizarre it had become a genre trope. The entire situation pivoted on that moment. They were no longer fugitives hiding from the authorities. They were no longer just survivors. They became patients, pioneers, partners with the very powers that had once tried to erase them. The dynamic shifted from one of secrecy and escape to one of tense, potential collaboration. Then a new voice filtered through the comms, older, familiar, and laced with a warmth the official channels lacked. Dr. Yumoto. We're here to help complete what we started. The original team, reassembled, not as captors, but as colleagues. The project hadn't been abandoned. It had been relocated, refined, and was now being offered back to them as a solution, not a sentence. This external contact was a universe rebalancing moment. It offered a path forward that didn't end in another explosion or a deeper isolation. It was a chance to fix the problem with the builders who had first laid the foundation. The arrival of both species' authorities working in concert presented an unexpected outcome. A collaborative scientific approach to solving the catastrophic problem they had all, in one way or another, created together. The cavalry hadn't come to arrest them. They had come to consult, to offer a terrifying, necessary choice and the expert support to see it through. Dr. Yumoto's image resolved on the main comms panel. Her hair was a shock of white now, her face lined with the years, but her eyes held the same sharp, impatient intelligence Kai remembered. She hadn't been hiding. She'd been preparing. Her reappearance wasn't a reunion. It was a pivot, a hard turn from a narrative of disaster to one of difficult, dangerous solution. She confirmed it flatly. The world hadn't stood still during their isolation. Longevity improvements, radical advances in consciousness containment and modulation tech. The science had continued without them, and it had finally matured. A safer, controlled continuation of the integration process was no longer a theory. It was a procedure. The safety of the merging process was no longer a gamble. It was framed within a shared, multinational scientific mission now, with layers of containment protocols and fail-safes the original project could only dream of. Her tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. She didn't soften the edges. Uncontrolled consciousness merger in the vicinity of temporal spatial distortions does carry certain risks. A pause. A look straight into the camera feed. Universe-altering risks. She laid it out like a mechanic explaining why driving a car with no brakes down a mountain was a bad idea. The danger was the same. The consequences were just bigger. Her return wasn't an apology for the past. It was a solution for the present. She represented the pure science that had been corrupted and weaponized, now returning with better tools to fix the mistake. She was the original architect, back on the job with an upgraded blueprint and a clearer understanding of the structural weaknesses. She provided the context they'd been missing, the piece that made their 3-year nightmare make sense in a larger picture. The technology to help them had finally caught up to the problem they represented. Kai and Athelia looked at each other. The choice was written in the air between them. They could refuse, stay in their broken, dangerous state, or they could seize the terrifying opportunity, align their minds with the team of researchers now orbiting above them, trust the process again. Trust her again. It was a monumental act of faith. They chose to trust. They chose the science and the woman who had once asked them to believe in an impossible future. This moment was a convergence. Science, courage, and a bruised but persistent affection for the work they had all started together. The original team, fractured by betrayal and time, was reassembling to heal the wound they had inadvertently created. It wasn't a warm feeling. It was a grim, determined alignment, a decision to pick up the pieces and try to build something stable from the wreckage. Dr. Yumoto's plan for safe completion protocols provided the one thing they had been desperately missing: a framework, a structure, a controlled, observable, and most importantly, stoppable process. It was the difference between setting off a bomb and running a complex engine. The perilous legacy of the project, the unstable reality-bending connection that threatened to tear a hole in the galaxy, could finally be approached not as a catastrophe, but as a hopeful, controlled experiment. They were going to finish what they started. This time with the lights on and a whole team of experts watching the dials. The blind leap of faith was over. The careful, precise work of engineering a stable future was about to begin. The offer sat there in the quiet of the chamber, solid and real. Complete the bond. Under controlled conditions, with a fleet of experts watching from orbit, ready to throw every failsafe they had at the problem. The choice was terrifying. The alternative was letting the feedback loop they'd created rip a hole in the fabric of local space. Unthinkable. The risks were written in cold, hard data on the main display. Universe-altering risks. A miscalculation could accelerate the distortions, turning their personal problem into a galactic-scale catastrophe in a matter of hours. The potential reward felt like a fragile thing next to that. Stability. A cessation of the hum in the walls and the bend in reality. A deep final understanding of each other, and perhaps a new form of existence neither could achieve alone. Completing the bond would do more than just seal a fracture. It would certify their shared consciousness as a legitimate continuum, not an anomaly to be feared and erased, but a documented, studied phenomenon, a new state of being. It was a choice to embrace the complete unknown, to trust the science again, the very process that had broken them and left them scattered across decades, to trust Dr. Yumoto and her new protocols, most of all to trust each other completely, to lower every defense and willingly step into a fusion that had once been their prison. This was the culmination of Kai's entire journey. It started with a refusal, a chair thrown in a medical bay, a violent no to having his memories taken. It ended here with a conscious, willing yes to remembering everything, together, to accepting the full weight of their shared past and the terrifying potential of their shared future. It was an act of incredible courage, to walk back into the machine that broke you, believing that this time, with the right help, it could make you whole. Their personal bond, once a secret they had to protect from the universe, became the axis around which the fate of local reality turned, an intimate decision with consequences that would ripple through interstellar space. The fate of everything nearby hinged on whether two people in a ruined lab could successfully finish a neural handshake. They looked at each other. No words were needed. The understanding was already there, a silent communication that had been building since the pod opened. The fear was present, a cold knot in both their stomachs, but it was outweighed by the pull. The pull toward completion, toward the future they were always meant to have, the one that had been stolen and was now being offered back, wrapped in warning labels and contingency plans. They gave the command, a single quiet affirmation sent back over the comms. They chose to proceed, to move, step by careful step under the watchful eyes of the science team, toward a complete and stabilized bond. It was a progressive surrender, a letting go of the individual fears and scars, hoping that what emerged on the other side would be something stronger, something new. Kai and Athelia made the choice. They transformed themselves in that moment. They ceased to be victims of a runaway experiment, casualties of a cover-up. They became its willing, active completion. They stopped fighting the pull and instead chose to follow it all the way to the end, to see what they were truly capable of when they were finally, fully connected. The process began. The chamber lights dimmed. The hum of the external containment field grew louder, a cage around a reaction that could save everything or end it. They were no longer just trying to survive the past. They were building a future. Together. The hum of the containment field outside faded to a low, steady thrum. The urgent tremble in the air was gone. Inside, the connection was complete. There were no blinding lights, no chorus of angels. Their minds touched, and the world didn't explode. It made sense. It was the quietest thing Kai had ever known. The feedback loop wasn't a scream anymore. It was a conversation. The data feeds from the orbiting science teams began to populate the main screen. They weren't showing disaster scenarios anymore. They were showing blueprints, schematics for a shared future, a multinational, multi-species coalition spanning humans and Stellari, cooperating in ways that looked less like diplomacy and more like a single organism, a hand and a wing working the same controls. This new alliance wasn't built on treaties or trade deals. It was built on the proven concept of shared consciousness, on mutual duties understood at a fundamental level. They were literally on the same wavelength. They were no longer fugitives hiding from the powers that erased them. They were co-creators, living, breathing proof that synthesis wasn't just a theory. It was a sustainable state of being, achievable when trust finally outran fear. The weaponized tech was retooled. The protocols for connection, once used to isolate, were now the foundation for a new form of community. The original beautiful purpose of the project was finally being realized, not in a lab but across star systems. Athelia stood beside him, her form no longer seeming out of place in the human-made chamber. She was just there, a part of the whole. Her soft assertion from their first meeting found its way back. "No one remembered me except you, human." The words were the same. The pain behind them was gone. They resonated with power now, a statement of fact that had become a declaration of victory. He looked at her, this transformed man who had wandered for 3 years without knowing why. He finally accepted the future he was meant for, one where love and memory weren't weaknesses. They were the strongest bonds a civilization could have. They were the infrastructure, the reason to keep going. His response landed with its full, unadorned weight. "Because you are very special to me." It wasn't a sentimental line. It was the catalyst, the simple, stubborn human truth that had broken a weaponized system of forgetting. Their personal connection, deemed an irrelevant variable by the conspirators, was the one thing their equations couldn't account for. It was the seed from which everything else grew. The failed experiment, the one that had been stolen, corrupted, and buried, became the foundation. The very thing meant to isolate them became the bridge for an unprecedented cross-species kinship. The original purpose of the integration project, to help 2 dying species evolve by sharing what the other lacked, was fulfilled in a way the original scientists could only dream of. It worked, just not on the timeline anyone expected. The completed bond transformed them. They became more than partners. They became symbols. A living example of a new interstellar culture built on empathy instead of exploitation, on cooperation instead of conquest, on a shared consciousness that celebrated difference instead of fearing it. They were the proof that a different way was possible, that a connection could be stronger than a border, that a memory could be more powerful than a weapon. The future wasn't written in treaties. It was written in the quiet understanding between 2 minds that had chosen to become one. The universe had a new blueprint, and they were the first line of the code. The station's new mess hall was quiet. The cosmic emergency was over. The containment fields powered down. Reality was, for the moment, stable. The grand work was done. Now came the smaller, more persistent challenges. Kai stared at the Stellari-designed coffee machine. It was a sleek, organic-looking console with pulsing fluid lines instead of buttons. It hummed at a frequency that made his teeth ache. He grunted. "So we save the universe. We rewrite the fundamental laws of interspecies consciousness. Next on the list is learning to properly operate the coffee machine." His tone was dry, the complaint of a man who found cosmic engineering simpler than culinary tech. Dr. Yumoto's voice came from a nearby terminal, her holographic form flickering with mild amusement. "Some tasks remain cosmically important, Kai. A stable reality requires a decent cup of coffee. The basics." Her comment wasn't a joke. It was a statement of fact. The grand and the mundane weren't separate categories anymore. They were part of the same continuum of problems that needed solving. This humor, this focus on the stubbornly ordinary, grounded the epic ending. It was a quiet rebellion against the sheer scale of what they'd done. Even reality-shaping heroes have to deal with burnt coffee and confusing interfaces. It reinforced the core theme that had carried them through everything. The simplest acts of connection, the shared frustration over a malfunctioning appliance, the daily rituals of life, these were the true constants. They were the things that shaped a future worth saving. Gerald the sandwich sat on the counter nearby, a little drier than usual but still present. a tangible link to 3 years of solitary weirdness that now felt like a different lifetime. Miranda's voice chimed in over the intercom, her wit unchanged by the new piece. Scanning indicates a 70% probability of user error. Perhaps begin with the large, clearly marked Activate glyph. Her sarcasm was a comfort. A piece of their old world, carried into the new one. Athelia moved to stand beside him, her luminous eyes scanning the machine's pulsing interface. She reached out, her fingers tracing a pattern on the smooth surface. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a simple, standard heat coil. The engineers retained a manual override for human users, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. They anticipated some resistance to change. She looked at him, the multifocal light in her eyes softening. The closing sentiment from their first meeting surfaced again, but the pain was gone, replaced by a quiet warmth. No one remembered me except you, human. It was an affirmation now. A statement of the core truth that had defied weapons and time. Memory doesn't survive through systems or data cores. It survives through chosen connection, through one person's stubborn refusal to forget another. The audience is left with that clear hook. The story argues that love, memory, and reality-shaping power aren't mutually exclusive. They can coexist. They feed each other. The grandest cosmic forces are built on the foundation of the smallest personal choices. The choice to remember. The choice to help someone with a confusing machine. The choice to make a joke when the world is ending. The epilogue sketches a hopeful hybrid future. A place where a Stellari scientist and a human scavenger can figure out a coffee maker, while a hybrid crew of both species works seamlessly together on the bridge outside the viewport. It's a future where the bonds of memory and affection, forged in resistance and solidified in trust, are accepted as the true practical forces that shape a stable reality. The war is over. The work of building a life together is just beginning, and it starts with getting the coffee right. Some things are too important to get wrong. The simplest bonds hold everything together, not gravity or quantum fields, memory, a choice made in anger, the rhythm of a shared joke. These are the things that shape a future worth the fight. Even when physics gets flexible, the connections we choose to keep, the people we refuse to forget don't just define our past. They actively build the reality we all have to live in. This is science fiction that hits close to home. It invites you to wonder, to reflect, to find your place in a vast and sometimes merciful universe.